Hello everyone. Welcome to the Sustainable Development e-talk series co-hosted by CNS and Indian Institute of Management Indore. Our keynote speaker for today's talk is none other than Patti Lynn, Executive Director at Corporate Accountability, an organization that is fiercely devoted to building a world where corporations answer to people, a world where all are able to live a healthy life, have access to clean water, healthy food, a safe place to live. Formerly called InFact, and the film which you all saw just now that was made by InFact, Corporate Accountability was founded in 1977. And since then, it has waged many successful campaigns. And I'm sure Patty will refer to some of those campaigns and let us know about them. All these campaigns were there to protect public health from abuse by transnational corporations. It was also very instrumental in the adoption of the Global Tobacco Treaty, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control at the World Health Assembly in 2003. And we are reminded of that treaty today because day after tomorrow is the World No Tobacco Day. And this treaty also set an important precedent for holding other dangerous industries and corporations accountable. And all this has been made possible due to the untiring efforts of people like Patti, who has devoted her life to work relentlessly to help advance social justice and dismantle systems of oppression. Today, she will share her insights on understanding and confronting corporate power and greed as essential to social justice and change.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
Akash Kumar, ma'am. On behalf of students of Indian Institute of Management, Indore, I would like to welcome Patti Lynn. Our heartiest welcome to you, ma'am, and we are looking forward to learning new things from you.
Before I hand sorry. Before I hand over the mic to Patty, we would like to dedicate this SDG talk, which is being held just 2 days before the World No Tobacco Day 2020, to Yul Francisco Dorado, a human rights lawyer who was a visionary tobacco control crusader in Latin America and a champion of public health. Yul is no more with us today, but he leaves behind a legacy on public health, environment, and human rights that extends globally and continues to inspire us to work for a tobacco-free world. Ever since his death in 2016, we at CNS have been dedicating our World No Tobacco Day webinars to Yul. This year, excuse me, this year, instead of just one such webinar, we have held several online talks focusing on tobacco control and social justice. My salutes to champions like you. And now over to you, Patty.
Shobha, thank you for that warm welcome. And it's very moving to me to know that the session is dedicated to Yul. He was a dear friend, and an inspiration and a mentor to me. And so to be part of this conversation today makes it even more meaningful that it's dedicated to Yul. And thank you, Shobha, for the introduction. It's so good to be here today. As Shobha and I were just talking right before our session started, it's a really intense time in the world in the midst of COVID-19. And there are so many powerful forces working to assert an agenda of control and corporate power. And there are so many people and organizations like CNS, like Shobha and Bobby, and all of our partners with corporate accountability who are working to bring a different vision of the world forward together, a world where all people thrive, regardless of race or class, religion, caste, sexual orientation, gender, physical ability, but because we're human beings, and also creating a world where the earth and natural world itself can thrive, unlike what's happening right now. We at Corporate Accountability work with people and allied organizations all around the world toward that vision, and it really is an honor to be here today talking with all of you. I appreciate you taking your time this evening to join this talk. Shobha gave a really great introduction to corporate accountability. I'll just share a few additional things in terms of the background of the organization, and then we'll move into more of a conversation and focus on corporate power and corporate campaigning. But as Shobha mentioned, we as an organization started in 1977 as part of a catalyst of the Nestle boycott. And at the time, Nestle was the largest food transnational corporation in the world, and they were really aggressively marketing infant formula as better than breastfeeding, with a particular focus on the global south, and really devastating consequences for infant health and life. And so, in fact, was originally the Infant Formula Action Coalition. We came together with people and allies around the world, organizing an international boycott of Nestle and really exposing its practices, putting pressure on the corporation to change. And ultimately, Nestle made a lot of changes in its practices, and the WHO passed an international code of conduct on the marketing of breast milk substitutes. The work to make sure that the infant formula industry continues to be held accountable and exposed for egregious practices is carried out by many people around the world right now, and is really important. A few of the key things that we as an organization, through our founding, kind of learned and carried forward with us from the Nestle boycott was, one, the ability to really change corporate practice by shifting to a transnational corporation, by exposing the reality behind its brand image, and reaching large numbers of people with that reality and engaging people in action. Another key part of the successful work of the Nestle boycott was Global South, Global North alliances. So our organizers and founders worked closely with public health professionals and leaders in the Global South to really bring the true impact of Nestle's practices to many of its customers in the Global North. And then also, it was an important sort of milestone and learning experience in pursuing international policy to hold transnational corporations accountable. The WHO Code of Conduct was an important step forward and was also non-binding. And so we learned from that experience that we really need to hold the bar higher for international law to really hold transnational corporations to account. And we've carried that forward, as Shobha said, in our work with the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control and other issues that we work on. We'll talk a little bit more. I know you just watched Making a Killing, which is great. I haven't seen that in a while. But we'll talk a little bit more about our tobacco campaign as we go through the discussion, just to give you a sense of the other areas of work for corporate accountability right now. In addition to our ongoing work on tobacco, which is a major priority, we work on water, climate, and food. All of our campaigns, as Shobha mentioned, really focus on how corporate practices threaten human health and well-being, threaten the planet, our democracies, and probably most importantly, how people can organize together to change that. I want to note that Bobby Ramakant from CNS is on our board of directors and has been a really important ally in advancing our work for over 20 years, and was a close partner with Yul Francisco Dorado as well. I think it's particularly important to be here today, really thinking not only about the power and scope of transnational corporations, but how we can work together to change their practices and ultimately shift power from transnational corporations to people to create the world that we need. I don't know if you've seen, Arundhati Roy had a really good column in the Financial Times a number of weeks ago now, but she talks about this moment as a portal where we can pass through and leave some of the really damaging practices that we've picked up for the last really couple hundred years as humanity, and move forward in more life-affirming directions. And so we at Corporate Accountability are holding on to that vision and working hard to make the connections that we need to bring that world into reality. And so it's so great to be here with you today. We're going to shift a little bit into an overview of corporate power from here, and then we'll talk some about corporate campaigning from Corporate Accountability's experience, and wrap up with a discussion. Shobha, I wonder if the first little piece on corporate power, we have part of a short video lined up, if it works. It's a short video made by our allies from the Story of Stuff project. It's clearly a very US focused video that illustrates one extremely problematic Supreme Court ruling in the US in terms of furthering the power of transnational corporations.
In season 1 of The Story of Stuff, we looked at a system that creates way too much stuff and way too little of what we really want. Now we're going to start looking at the stories behind this story of stuff. That's where we'll find ways to turn this situation around. Welcome to season 2.
Bad for you, bad for America.
He'll put us back on track.
Hester ran our state into the ground. Now he wants to be your senator.
Stand up. Say no.
Stand up and say no.
Bad for you, bad for America.
Vote for this guy.
Vote for this guy.
Aren't you tired of this stuff? Why is it that every election season it becomes impossible to hear the facts over all these misleading ads? And if it seems the problem is only getting worse, that's because it is. We can thank the Supreme Court for that. In 2010, they decided that it would be just fine for corporations to spend as much money as they want telling us who to vote for. Wait, why are corporations telling us who to vote for? Let's get something straight. This is a democracy, rule by the people. I'm a person, you're a person, and Chevron, not a person. So shouldn't elections be all about what people want? Good jobs, safe products, health care, responsible government, clean air and water. It turns out the vast majority of Americans want to see a lot more done on all of these things. But what people want is going to take a back seat as long as corporations can spend millions getting lawmakers elected. Oil companies have gotten politicians to block laws protecting our climate. Manufacturers have pushed through trade agreements that gut product safety and help ship jobs overseas. Insurance companies have been the first ones consulted on health reform, and giant corporations have gotten bailouts and subsidies. Maybe that's why all kinds of people, Republicans, Democrats, independents, are totally frustrated with our government. So how did we, the people, lose control of our democracy to begin with? Let's go back a few centuries. Back then, there were just people. Some of them owned businesses, some of them worked for businesses. Still, there were just people. Then people invented something entirely new, the corporation. These legal entities exist independently of the people who own them. If a corporation does something that gets it into trouble, the owners can say, "Don't blame me, blame the corporation. I'm just a shareholder." When the United States came into existence, corporations were easier to keep in check. Back then, the government would grant them charters for a specific short-term project, like building a bridge or a railroad. Once they fulfilled their purpose, they were disbanded. But over time, the law changed, and corporations no longer had to be turned off once their project was complete. They began to live on indefinitely, with a much more general purpose: profit. And that's how the modern corporation was born. Today's corporations have evolved to have something very dangerous in their programming. Unlike people who are driven by all kinds of motivations, doing the right thing, love for family, their country, the planet, publicly traded corporations are now required by law and the markets to pursue one single motivation above all others: maximize value for shareholders. Make as much money as possible. That's it. No, really, that's what the law and the markets demand. Imagine a friend saying, "The only thing I care about is money." It's not someone you'd want to leave your kids with, or your democracy for that matter. Yes, it is people who run these corporations, but their human motivations come second. If they prioritize anything at all over maximizing profits, they're out of there. Can corporate leaders do good things like give to charity or try to be more green? Sure, but not if it conflicts with maximum profits. And since their humble beginnings, corporations have grown huge. 53 of the 100 biggest economies on Earth now are corporations. So corporations have a single-minded profit motive. They're humongous, and their owners can easily dodge the blame for any harm they cause. That makes them tricky to share a country with. If we want them to serve us and not the other way around, they need some basic ground rules. And that's where the government comes in, setting rules to keep things fair and safe and to protect society from corporations run amok. Now, if their main objective is to maximize profit, do you think corporations are content to follow the rules that keep them in check? No, of course not. They want to write those rules. But who is supposed to write the rules in a democracy? People. That's why one of the corporation's key strategies for sneaking into our democracy is saying that they should have the same First Amendment rights as real live people. And that's exactly how they won the 2010 Supreme Court case known as Citizens United versus FEC. In that case, 5 members of the Supreme Court decided that it's unconstitutional to put any limits on how much money corporations can spend influencing elections. Why? They said these limits violate the First Amendment guaranteeing free speech. Now, obviously, our founding fathers who wrote the First Amendment were trying to protect the free speech of people. But this decision rides on the crazy argument that corporations should be treated the same as people and get the same rights that real people get. This means corporations can spend as much as they want, whenever they want, to intimidate or crush candidates running on a platform against their interests and support candidates who will do what they ask. It's great news for corporations wanting to handpick the lawmakers whose job it is to keep them in check. Now, I am all for free speech. If every shareholder and employee at Exxon wants to personally support some oil lobbyist running for Senate, that's their right. There are millions more people who will support a different candidate. That's democracy in action. But now, Exxon or any other corporation can decide to spend unlimited dollars from its huge corporate coffers to influence an election without even consulting its shareholders. This is a big deal. If the top 100 corporations decided to throw in just 1% of their profits, they could outspend every candidate for president, House, and Senate combined. Good luck having your free speech heard over that. So did opening the floodgates on this money actually cause a flood? Sure did. In 2010, the kind of independent groups that corporations are now allowed to support spent $300 million. That's more than every midterm election since 1990 combined. So corporations are drowning out our voices, getting what they want, and our democracy is in trouble. But we can totally save it. People are so outraged by the Supreme Court decision that a massive response is mobilizing. Such a huge problem requires a huge solution, and we've got one. A new constitutional amendment. The amendment is smart and clear. It reverses this disaster to our democracy by clarifying that the First Amendment isn't meant for for-profit corporations. I get that amending the Constitution is a big, ambitious goal, but it's not impossible. Every time huge positive change has been made in this country, it's because people dreamed big, aimed high, and set ambitious goals. It's time to do that now, because the life of our democracy is on the line. Public financing of campaigns would be another huge step forward. Congress is working on a bill right now that would make it possible for candidates to get elected without corporate dollars. Remember, 85% of Americans think that corporations have too much influence in our democracy. That's enough to make change, if we can turn that sentiment into action. Look, the corporations won't get out of our democracy until we, the people, get back in. So keep fighting for renewable energy, green jobs, healthcare, safe products, and top-notch public education. But save some energy for the battle of our lifetimes. A battle that can open the door to solving all of these things. It's time to put corporations back in their place and to put the people back in charge of our democracy.
Great, thanks, Shobha. One of the things, as I was thinking about our presentation and conversation today, and the reason I thought it'd be helpful to take a look at that video is just that, it's important to acknowledge that many of the most harmful transnational corporate practices emanate from US-based corporations like Exxon and Monsanto and so many others. And so I think to share a little bit of background on really damaging Supreme Court rulings that expand the power and ability to operate of transnational corporations based here, help shed a light on what we're dealing with globally. But then also, I think there's a few things that are highlighted in that video that are just sort of important as we're thinking about like the understanding the power of corporations and how they operate so that we can actually effectively challenge and change that. One of the things, I guess there's actually 4 things that I want to just draw forward, mostly referenced in that video, about modes of operation for transnational corporations that it's important to keep in mind when we're thinking about corporate campaigning and really challenging and changing corporate behavior. The first one is really the profit imperative and sort of holding on to the fact that what is most important for a transnational corporation is to turn profit for shareholders. And that is really accounted for on a quarterly basis. So there's a very short-term horizon that CEOs and corporate executives are calculating when they're thinking about their profits. And so longer-term impact of their practices is not really factored into their calculations, given this extremely short-term horizon that they're measured on in terms of their corporate profits. A second mode of operation that's really particularly damaging is financialization. So that's basically just the obvious concept that for a transnational corporation and the executives running that corporation, that everything basically comes down to a price point. And so there are so many things as human beings in the world that we can't actually measure the cost of, the sacredness of a river, the beauty of a forest, the cost of human suffering does not get calculated into the measures of corporations' success or failure. And that really leads to a couple things, dehumanization, right? So seeing workers simply as entities that have to be paid to maximize a profit rather than people with full lives and families and communities that should be treated with respect, and leads to some very serious exploitation of people and communities. Here in the US, the folks and communities, the people and communities that are often most exploited are Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, women, children, low-income people, and that is likely the case in many places across the world, given corporate exploitation. That's related also to another mode of operation, which is amorality. So transnational corporations function outside of human moral behavior and decision making. So even when a corporation does something that projects altruism, that's really something intended to go back to enhance its bottom line and improve its image. The fourth mode of operation to highlight for a transnational corporation is the growth imperative. So basically that corporations live or die by whether they are sustaining growth, not just maintaining their size, but sustaining growth. And one of the things that was highlighted less in this video, but is a core focus of corporate accountability, is that corporations based in the US and other wealthy countries will often have the greatest negative impact in global South countries. In the growth imperative, when regulation gets a little bit tighter here in the US or in other global North countries, there's a push to expand markets into the global South, which has been historically incredibly damaging and is something that we work with our allies to really counter and change in terms of corporate practice. So shifting a little bit from the modes of operation, some of those 4 key modes, into just a quick review. This came up some in the video and some of the information there was a little bit outdated as well, but just one thing I wanted to touch on is the scope of corporate power and a couple different measures of that. So one of the things that's important for us to keep in mind is that corporations are more powerful than many nations. So in 2020, an updated figure is that 71 of the world's 100 richest entities were corporations, not governments, as calculated by the Transnational Institute. And they include ExxonMobil, BP, Chevron, Nestle. It's even a more stark ratio when you look at the top 200 economies, which 157 of those are corporations. Another thing for us just to be attentive to and be aware of is that corporations leverage their enormous wealth and power in many different ways to influence both elections and policy in the US and around the world. So here in the US, corporations spend hundreds of millions of dollars to influence elections and policy. One example is that in 2017, according to The Hill, which is a Washington, DC based media outlet, the top 50 lobbying spenders in Washington, DC were almost exclusively from corporate America, and they spent more than $540 million on influence campaigns. And then, another thing that is just our experience here and in many places is that it's simply become routine business for corporations to spend huge amounts of money to stop even the most common sense public health or worker protections from becoming law through lobbying, through paid advertising, through misleading information. And so we're up against a tremendous amount of power, obviously power that it expands the globe. And one of the things that we at Corporate Accountability is core to our mission is really analyzing the transnational corporate power and thinking about how do we create change together on a global scale. And part of that is tracking the behavior and actions of transnational corporations with our allies and people around the world in every corner of the globe. One of the stories that illustrates the impact of corporate power and abuse most negatively on people and the environment is Shell's history in Nigeria. So this is probably familiar to many of you, but since 1936, Shell, one of the largest oil transnationals in the world, has been operating in Nigeria, extracting oil with really devastating consequence for the local environment and for people who live in the oil-rich regions of Nigeria, particularly the Ogoni people. The wealth that's been extracted from Nigeria by Shell is enormous, and the human rights abuses to protect that wealth are also really, really severe, including collusion with a military dictatorship in the 1990s to execute leading activists, including Ken Saro-Wiwa in 1995, was one of 9 people executed by the Nigerian government for organizing a boycott of Shell and its practices and bringing global attention to its impacts in Nigeria. So that's one direct example. I know there are a lot of examples we've talked over the years with Bobby in India of transnational corporations building dams, building coal-fired power plants, and partnering with other entities to get the financing to be able to do that as well, like Tata partnering with the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank, the private arm of the World Bank, to finance coal-fired power plants and other really damaging and devastating projects. Another form of corporate power that exerts itself in influencing policy that we at Corporate Accountability monitor, track, and expose is the use of front groups and trade associations with more benign sounding names, sometimes even positive sounding names, to influence policy on behalf of transnational corporations in less transparent ways. One of the examples that we've been really following over the last several years is the International Emissions Trading Association, IATA, which was founded by a number of corporations, including BP, essentially to advance the fossil fuel industry and polluting industry's interests in climate policy. IATA has somehow managed over the last couple decades to become a credible force within the UN climate treaty talks. And so they actually have representatives on delegations deciding and influencing policy positions on behalf of governments, and just walk the halls. They have huge numbers of people, outnumbering many governments, to influence policy, to ensure that things like carbon trading is built into the implementation of the Paris Agreement, something that's been demonstrated not to actually reduce emissions, but is a policy that's strongly favored by the fossil fuel industry. And so we work with our allies to document who are the entities behind trade associations like IATA, to expose the reality of their agenda so that governments and policymakers who are actually working to advance policy that addresses the impact of climate change can do so without such sort of behind the scenes corporate interference. So those are a couple of things I wanted to just draw our attention to as we're thinking about the scope and power of transnational corporations. We also increasingly live in an age where corporations own the platforms through which we communicate to each other, things like Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms. And one of the things that Corporate Accountability, as we've been moving through the last couple decades, we've also been paying attention to and in conversation with our allies with is how we as humans can become more isolated when we become dependent on social media and corporate owned social media as a primary way that we're connecting with each other in the world or getting our information. And so it's something as organizers that we're really attentive to, is how do we maintain human to human connection where we can continue to build our power and feel our power and know our power and exert it to create the kind of change that we need to in the world so that we can change directions pretty dramatically from where we are today. So that's the next thing I want to just speak to a little bit, is when we is to switch into how do we, what are some of the ways, and in particular with corporate accountability, we have a particular method of how do we bring the true power that we as people in the world have to bear on the systems and activities of transnational corporations that are creating such harm. And for us at Corporate Accountability, we've been developing a model of corporate campaigning for a little bit over 40 years. And the core of our approach to social change is that we can actually, as people, change the practices of transnational corporations very dramatically when we act together strategically. And one of the main reasons for that is going back up to the analysis of how corporations operate that we talked about a little bit earlier, and knowing that really the profit imperative is what drives corporations. And so when we can work together to shift the cost benefit ratio, to drive up the cost of business practices and drive down the benefit, we can meaningfully and over time dramatically shift the way that corporations can operate in the world. And I think for us, sometimes we can see the scope of power of governments and corporations and feel very daunted at what we can do as individuals. But when we remember our power to act collectively and strategically, we can also remember that we actually participate and shape the institutions that exist in the world. And when we come together, we can create really meaningful change. In terms of corporate accountability's approach to corporate campaigning, one of the things that we have really focused on over the years is laying out strategies that lead to our ability to win campaigns, not just to campaign and fight the fight, but to really think about how do we over time put together enough strategies and enough power that we can actually change the way an industry can operate all around the world. And so one of the things that, going back to the cost benefit ratio, that we know are a few of the factors that inform our experience and belief that we can continue to do this, include that for a transnational corporation, their brand image is one of their most valuable assets. And so when we can come together and expose the reality of the practices of a transnational corporation and shift the way that people perceive and interact with that corporation, that's very powerful. Public opinion and consumer opinion for corporations is a really critical factor. In terms of public opinion and brand value, when we stop and think about things like, why would people eat McDonald's hamburgers when really, or French fries, when actually they're not very good. They don't taste good, they're low quality, they're extremely unhealthy. The reason McDonald's can sell so much of its unhealthy and low quality food is because enough people have made a positive brand association with those products. And so we have the ability to interfere with that and to really show people the true cost of McDonald's business, or the same with Coca-Cola, right? So that brand image is incredibly valuable, and it's a way for us to enter into work that interferes with their ability to expand their markets. Ultimately, knowing that we can achieve the tipping points where we create either enough discomfort or a shift enough in the cost-benefit ratio for a transnational corporation that needs to decide to change. And it can for sure I mean, often when we talk about the scale of a Philip Morris International or Coca-Cola or McDonald's, it takes years to build the kind of pressure that we need to meaningfully change practice and hold it in place. But we have demonstrated together that we can do that, and it's a core part of how we as a global society need to continue to advance social change. One of the things, as we were thinking, Bobby and I were thinking about the topic for this conversation today, that it seemed like it would be useful to draw forward is just a little bit of the history. You actually saw through Making a Killing quite a bit of it, but I was thinking about our tobacco campaign, which at Corporate Accountability, we kicked off back in 1994. So it's a little over 25 years running, working on big tobacco and in close partnership for almost all of that time with allies around the world. I wanted to just draw forward some of the core strategies that we used in putting together our part in the global tobacco campaign, and then turn it over to discussion. But when going back to the brand image of a corporation like a Philip Morris International, Shobha mentioned earlier at the outset after the viewing of Making a Killing that the product that the tobacco industry produces, markets, and sells and profits from is deadly when used as intended. And so when we as people stop and think about how are we letting a transnational corporation get away with that kind of behavior, many people actually stop and want to get involved with something that interferes with that, especially when we think about the scope of death that continues to rise by allowing the tobacco industry to go on with its business. And what Philip Morris wants to create is an image of smoking and tobacco, the ongoing evolution of tobacco products and nicotine products, as something that's cool and individualistic, and just associating its products with other qualities other than sickness and death. And so part of our job is to continue to associate its products and its evolution with the actual impact that it causes on people and human life and families. And that's what we have from the outset really focused on. Our campaign for corporate accountability began intensively as a corporate campaign that was really exposing the marketing practices of Philip Morris International, and at the time, R.J. Reynolds, using the Marlboro Man and Joe Camel essentially to addict young people to its highly addictive and deadly products, and reached and engaged with our allies, millions and millions of people, in really the great harm that images like the Marlboro Man and Joe Camel were creating by hooking young people to such harmful products, and ultimately led to the retirement of Joe Camel and a significant drawback on the use of the Marlboro Man. Another key part of our campaign over the years with the tobacco industry has been to really put direct pressure on the decision makers of the transnational corporations, so the top executives and board, realizing that while corporate structures create a structure that protects executives from the practices and liability of the corporation, there are human beings that are making those decisions. And so that's something that we bring to light and put pressure on board members and executives, including to highlight where there are conflicts of interest. Over the years, Philip Morris International has had board members that are parts of major health institute, also on the board of major health institution, or a school of business ethics at universities here in the US. And so we've pressured other institutions to disassociate themselves with tobacco industry board and executives, which creates sort of a split in the power that the tobacco industry is working to continue to consolidate. Another key part of our campaign has always been to engage large numbers of people in public education initiatives that turn into action, helping to educate more people and also putting pressure on decision makers. And as we were doing sort of all of these pieces of a corporate campaign, building relationships also with allies across the globe, working to challenge the tobacco industry in different regions of the world, one of the really core strategies that became a lead strategy for us and really continues to be essential to our tobacco campaigning is what Shobha mentioned at the beginning, also the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. So we at Corporate Accountability joined with allies back in the mid to late 90s, putting together a global coalition of campaigners called the Network for Accountability of Tobacco Transnationals to help make sure that the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control really established a very high bar. It's the WHO, the World Health Organization's first internationally binding treaty, so a far step ahead from the Code of Conduct from the Nestle days. And we knew that it needed to set some of the strongest public health and corporate accountability policy that the world had yet seen if it was going to rein in, help to be a key tool to rein in the tobacco industry. And the text of the treaty itself, adopted by the World Health Assembly in 2003, now ratified by more than 180 countries, is incredibly strong. And that is a result of primarily the leadership of a number of government coalitions across the global South, working together with civil society campaigners to say that we need this treaty to succeed because we can't afford to have it really become a tool that transnational corporations can use for their own benefit. And so some of the key provisions of that treaty include serious restriction, including some bans on marketing of tobacco products. It also prioritizes public health over trade. It protects public health policy being set at the national and the international level from the influence of the tobacco industry. And it calls on countries to hold the tobacco industry liable for the harms that it has caused. Now, the ongoing implementation of this treaty, as countries have ratified it, continues to be a global fight that we engage in every day with our allies in both government and civil society to continue to make sure that the implementation of this treaty is as strong as it can possibly be, given that it protects human life at a large scale when implemented powerfully, which it is being done by a number of countries around the world. And it really, CNS and allies all across the global South are some of the leading forces in continuing to expose the abuses of the tobacco industry and work to make sure that together we continue to campaign to hold this industry to account. And one other key part of the work on the tobacco industry and the treaty in particular is that it has created precedents for other industries. So, for example, the provision that says the tobacco industry should not be at the table influencing the creation of tobacco control and public health policy is the first of its kind in international law. And now we are working with our allies to apply that to other places, including a really major focus on the UN climate treaty and other climate policy making spaces to say that the fossil fuel industry and other major polluters should not be at the table making climate change policy, or else we're never going to achieve the kind of really transformative policy that we need to address the scope of the climate emergency. And so you could go to makebigpolluterspay.org, which includes both the need to protect climate policy from the fossil fuel industry and polluting industries, and also to hold the fossil fuel industry liable for the harms that it has caused globally, especially over recent decades. And that's ongoing work. We would love to get back in touch with you. There's a lot of big action plans coming up in the next few weeks on the climate campaign that connects the work from the tobacco industry campaigning that I was just talking about to the fossil fuel industry and other big polluters. So there's a lot of opportunity to stay connected there and to move all of this work forward. And I think that's mostly what I wanted to cover, Shobha, and then open it up to some discussion from here. I don't know, Shobha, if you also had anything you wanted to add before we do discussion.
No, but I wanted you to share something about your Think Outside the Bottle campaign.
Oh, yeah.
That's a very important one. And also your Boycott Ge campaign, if you could just share with our audience.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure thing. So the GE boycott well, I skipped over that part in our history because there's so much content, but that was basically in the mid 80s when we as an organization were sort of moving on from the Nestle boycott. It was a really high point in the nuclear arms buildup and the Cold War, and there's a lot of attention to the role of governments in producing nuclear weapons, but very little attention at the time in who are the transnational corporations that are pushing those policies and profiting from the manufacture of nuclear weapons. And there were a number of transnational corporations involved in that. General Electric at the time was the industry leader in producing parts of nuclear weapons. And that was sort of a little known fact that GE did not really want to be associated with. And so we organized a campaign essentially to expose the corporations driving the buildup of nuclear weapons, with GE as a lead focus within the first couple years of that campaign, and organized an international boycott of GE, including working with a lot of health institutions and hospitals to not purchase GE medical equipment. And so that actually had a huge impact on GE's cost-benefit ratio, both reputationally. We produced a short documentary for that too, which you might want to check out. It's a really good short film produced in 1991 called Deadly Deception, that exposes GE's role in nuclear weapons and educates people about the ongoing campaign. And it actually won an Academy Award for a short documentary, which was just this kind of incredible, unlikely moment in corporate campaigning, but it reached a global audience. And given the combination of over $100 million in actual loss from medical equipment sales, the reputational impact of the boycott, and then the visibility of Deadly Deception, once it won the Oscar, GE did reach that tipping point in 1993 and pulled out of the nuclear weapons business entirely. And then our Think Outside the Bottle campaign was something that we, back in 2005, as a US-based organization started to look at the issue of water and people's access to water, and a whole range of industries working to commodify water, which is both essential for our survival and sacred to many of us. We spent quite some time looking at how there are many organizations that work on water. How can we, given our focus and approach to work and where we're located, join into a movement to really protect water as a common good and shared essential resource, and a life-affirming thing that we have and share on this planet, and not turn it over to Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Suez and Veolia, a whole range of transnational corporations trying to figure out how to profit, including from increasing scarcity of water. We launched essentially it was a public education campaign called Think Outside the Bottle, where in the US, the market for bottled water had for over a decade been growing in double-digit figures every year. So just this booming market where many people were doubting the quality of tap water, even in places where the tap water was just fine, and switching to bottled water because of the really hundreds of millions of dollars that Coke, Pepsi, and Nestle were putting into marketing their bottled water products. And so we launched a major kind of consumer education into action campaign to challenge the notion that corporations should be bottling up water and selling it back to people, and that instead we should really be protecting water as a shared resource. And we partnered early on in that campaign, again, with some of our close allies in India who are exposing Coke's role in both polluting and using up groundwater and controlling water resources in several different places on the Indian subcontinent to profit from groundwater to bottle it up and sell it there. So we did some good campaigning and still maintain those connections today around Coke's abuses, bottling in India.
Yes, thank you. And in India also, of course, tap water, a lot many people don't have access to potable drinking water, as you must be knowing.
Yeah,
But this bottled water concept has taken us in so much that anything which is bottled goes in for clean water, whereas actually it is not so. And even there are so many companies selling bottled water. And we feel, that is the marketing tactic of the corporations, as you call it,
yeah.
that once it is in the bottle, then even that any muddy water will also, we will feel that it is, yes, it's good and clean water. So,
Exactly. And in here in the US, both Coke and Pepsi bottle water from the same plants that our tap water comes from. And they sell it back to people at thousands of times the cost. And without questioning the marketing, people just go along with it. So that's another, a really important place for us to interfere, including our focus is primarily around protecting water as something that we all need to share and not turn it over to corporations. And another just incredibly detrimental part of the bottled water industry is the production of and use of plastics, which is a major problem in terms of pollution on many levels also. So.
and that's very true. But I think in US there are a lot of campaigns going on in universities and colleges against bottled water. I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah, that was a campaign here in the U.S. Think Outside the Bottle that reached really large numbers of people, college students on campuses. A lot of different cities actually stopped spending taxpayer money on bottled water through our campaigning. We've done a lot of work with national parks here in the U.S. to not sell bottled water. So it has reached many different parts of society, and has, the bottled water industry continues to try to reinvent itself. But there has been an important shift in consciousness here. And then, it's as with all of our campaigns, making the deeper connections with our allies globally to say, how do we protect water everywhere and not just in bottles. A big part of our campaign is also around fighting the privatization of municipal water services as well. So that's another whole big area of focus for us, where we have some really deep, long partnerships on the African continent. And that's like a leading edge of our water campaigning.
Right. And also against McDonald's, I think there are a lot many campaigns going on. In fact, I have watched that film, Super Size Me.
Yeah.
That's
yeah, there's been some really great exposure of McDonald's practices. And
yes.
we actually just last week, we partnered with an organization here in the US called Fight for 15, which works for a $15 minimum wage for workers in the US. And we introduced a resolution at the McDonald's shareholders meeting. They actually they censored the organizer from Fight for 15 and shut down his ability to bring forward the resolution, which really just demonstrated that they're threatened by it. And it gave us actually more opportunity to draw media attention to it. So,
I just wanted to share a small incident, Patti.
Yeah.
And this is around 20 years ago when McDonald's had recently come to India. And my brother lives in Canada. So his son had come for the first time to our place in Lucknow. He was 5 years old. And so people were just trying to make him at ease. Somebody said, come on, we'll take you to McDonald's. And the poor boy started crying. He said, no, McDonald's, the food is not good there because...
Oh, that's so great, Shobha.
He got scared. He said, no, I don't want to go to McDonald's. So that's the power of persuasion, and the power means how you deal with the children. Like
exactly. Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yes, so
right.
I can never forget the look on his face that I don't want to go.
That's a great story, and it shows, right, that children are actually very receptive to the messages they receive.
Yes.
Right?
What messages are we giving them here?
Exactly, right.
But when on the television all the time we are seeing messages for fast foods and for the sugary drinks and for Coca-Cola, obviously they get carried away. That's how they get carried away. Yes.
Yeah.
So many thanks, Patti, for this very inspiring discussion. And I'm just remembering, and I want to share with the audience that I've had the privilege of meeting Patti in her office in Boston some years ago. We now open for the question and answer session, and participants, please type in your questions in the chat box. We already have some questions there. So I will just read them out because we are recording this, although you can read it in the chat box yourself, Patti, but I want to read it out so that
Great.
it is recorded also. Yes. So there's a question from Saida Deep, and she says one of the strongest fierce social movements are led by women. Like, for
Yeah.
example, in India, Medha Patekar, Arundhati, and women also recently joined hand against discriminatory laws on citizenship in India. It was a totally woman-led movement. Also, there are movements opposing patents to access to medicines to climate change. So do you see a link with women power and corporate accountability movements also?
Yeah, I mean, our experience just even within our own organization for almost all of our history, the leadership of the organization has been women. And as we, especially now, I think as we experience the scale of inequity in the world and look to where there is the deepest and fiercest leadership, I agree that it is women led right now. And I also just want to say that the organizing that happened in India around the citizenship laws was an inspiration to so many of us here in the United States to really demonstrate how when there's such discriminatory legislation being forced by a national government, we need to resist and react. But I do, our experience has also been that women are a powerful force in social change. We, our closest partners on the African continent are Corporate Accountability and Public Participation in Africa. They've been leading several years fight to stop the privatization of water in Lagos, which is a city of 21 million people. And we've been partnering really closely with them. And the most powerful moments of that campaign have been when women organize and come and just like confront the power of the local state government that's working to privatize. That's really been like the most unstoppable force in that campaign as well.
We have a question from Rahul Sharma from Hyderabad, who says, I never thought that we can demand right to drink clean water from the tap. So personal gratitude for making me and others think and question on this, how to go back to the good old days when people could drink safe water from water bodies or directly from the tap. Now on smart city model water privatizing is a possibility. Now, so that's very true. Like even in my childhood, I remember there were no water purifiers, but now every family has one. We have a problem also because the water which comes in the tap very often is not drinkable. It's not potable. But again, I think it's the government's responsibility to at least provide with clean drinking water.
Exactly.
And, yes. And recently, I'm reminded there was an advertisement, I think 2-3 days back, by some Kent water purifiers, that the name of the company is Kent, and they were advertising that your domestic helps, the domestic help who comes to your house, her hands may not be clean, and to protect yourself from COVID-19, make her wash her hands with water purified by them.
Wow.
But there was a lot of hue and cry raised against that, and then they apologized and they withdrew that. As if also suggesting as if it's only the socially sort of disadvantaged people who are spreading the disease and not us. It was in very poor taste. They had to withdraw that. And then there are always market solutions like for water or power backup. In India, I think every house has what we call an inverter, because we don't get continuous supply of electricity. So I think that is also industries behind that.
Exactly.
So otherwise, who is going to buy their inverters?
Right.
So I am again, we are just coming close toward the end of the session. So please type in your questions. Anybody who wants to ask some questions, please type it in the chat box before we close. your last chance to ask a question. Okay, there's one more question that governments have promised to end diseases and they have signed on to the SDGs. Uh, but for tobacco or alcohol, targets are very low. It says 10% reduction in alcohol consumption by 2025. And also for tobacco, shouldn't we be demanding to end tobacco? Like just, it's not that reducing consumption, but just ending it altogether.
Yes, I totally agree with that
Yes.
recommendation.
Yes, because we talk of increasing pictorial warnings and in raising taxes,
Yeah.
but I feel there should be a ban on selling a product which kills and which everybody knows, and it is there is evidence that it kills. So
Yeah.
why
I think
is
it speaks to the power of the industry, but I think the
Yes.
greater our vision and demand for how to stop that abusive industry, the more quickly
Yes.
it will come about.
Yeah, right. There is one suggestion to end the tax loopholes for corporations.
Yeah,
which are there.
so important.
Yes. So very often, and even in the case of tobacco products, Patti, they have different taxes. In India, we have the very cheap cigarette called the BD, the local cigarette. So
Yeah.
the taxes are very low because it is said that they are the poor man's tobacco product. So
Right.
the government is trying to show that we are we are so supportive of the poor, of their needs that we'll put lesser tax on them, and then so I think that also, because that is as bad as the cigarette.
Definitely. There's a lot of issues around taxes that are so important to be able to fund governments also to provide the services. We need governments, not corporations, to be providing, like water.
Yes. So like, yes, Sartaj, please ask your question.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
So this is a kind of a big question, but so in order to remove the tobacco companies like altogether, which is a really ideal goal and it should be followed. So as you were talking about, ma'am, you were talking about the tax revenues or the tax which come from the which goes to the government, which they collect by basically the revenue they collect. So what would be if we were to altogether stop the industry, alcohol and tobacco, which contribute a lot in taxes to the government, which are inherently implicitly used for other purposes such as building government schools, providing basic necessary education till 8th class and things like that. So how could we manage the lessening of the revenue which would come if we close all the industries of tobacco and alcohol?
Well, one of the things about the tobacco industry is that while tobacco taxes do fund some other government services, the healthcare costs that the tobacco industry puts onto society, both governments and individual families, through rising rates of tobacco-related disease and death are enormous. So even conservative economic analysis indicates that overall the positive economic impact is to actually severely reduce tobacco consumption because of the enormous healthcare costs. So it is, with all of this, it takes a little bit of time, but that is actually the bigger picture economic reality is that it's healthier for economies to not be reliant on tobacco.
Yes, I think there was some study on that tobacco causes a loss of 1.4 trillion US dollars every year, eventually, by way of loss in daily working days and on spending on health issues of the people because of tobacco. But that is how the corporations project it to be, so that it will be a loss to the government.
Right.
But it's something like taking it in from one hand and giving more from the other hand. So eventually the government is at a loss, perhaps, if they do not stop tobacco.
Which is the case for so many harmful and polluting industries beyond tobacco as well.
Exactly.
Yep.
Right. Okay, I think we have already overshot the time. And so with this, we come to the end of today's discussion. In today's SDG Talks, co-hosted by Indian Institute of Management Indore and CNS, we were listening to Patti Lynn, Executive Director at Corporate Accountability, on how corporate power threatens social justice. So bye till we meet again, and please stay safe. Our sincere thanks once again to Patti.
Thank you,
Very
Shobha, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.